This is the School Success Podcast, a podcast for school leaders to learn from other school leaders what's working and what's not, and to get inspiration and encouragement, as well as strategies to grow school enrollment, connect with families, retain teachers, recruit teachers, and everything in between. You guys are heroes, and I cannot thank you enough for pouring into this next generation that's coming behind us. My goal is you will take at least one thing away from every episode that you can take back to your school to make it better than it is right now. Please enjoy the School Success Podcast.
Time for school.
Hey, school success makers. Today we're joined by my new friend Eugene out of the great state of New York. He runs a very successful tutoring company, and we dive into all things tutoring and how he operates and how he's there to help schools, and hopefully it'll be a good resource for you guys if that's something that you need. So please stay tuned for this next episode of the School Success Podcast. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the School Success Podcast. I'm your host, Mitchell Slater, joined by a new friend out of New York, Eugene Netupsky, who is the CEO of his tutoring company, 𝐿𝐳𝐭𝐬𝐢𝐚 Tutoring, and they tutor kids from all over, and very high-end tutoring company. He's doing some amazing things, and I was like, man, we do not have anybody that's done tutoring that's been on the podcast before, and I thought this would be a great resource and a great way for you school leaders to learn from somebody who does this all day long with his team and himself. So I won't take any more of his thunder away. Eugene, welcome to the podcast, sir.
Thanks so much for having me, Mitchell.
It's going to be a blast, man. And I always like to start off the podcast. I know you and I did this before we started recording, but you live in New York. I mean, literally like this, you could do anything you could want to in this city, but I always ask, like, hey, what is the funnest thing to do in New York? Like, if you and your wife were to go out, have some fun, like, what is the funnest thing you like to do in New York?
You know, we like what's simple, and we really like going on walks, getting a Americano. We live close to Central Park. Walking through Central Park is always a favorite thing to do. And we actually try to stay away from a lot of the touristy areas like Times Square and areas that are higher density.
Okay. I would love to go to Central Park. I mean, I've seen it in the movie Elf, of course. You know, it's a big scene there. But just, I don't know if people have ever looked it up on a map before, but it is ginormous how big that park is, and like how you could be in the middle of it from pictures I've seen and not know you're in New York City. Is that true?
Absolutely true. And there are always areas. It's amazing. Every year I discover a new area of the park that I never knew existed, and that's a testament to its size.
Man, and there is rules and stuff. I know you can't be out, there's like a curfew, you can't be out there in the park. What are some other rules that are in the park, like you can't do? Can you have a football game? Could you have a football game playing on the grass and tackling people and stuff?
I think that you can. I don't think there's any rules in terms of curfews. There might be. I wouldn't be out that late anyway in the park. But in terms of rules, I think that they're pretty liberal. I think you can play football. I think you can play baseball. There's soccer. There's basketball. There's picnics. Yeah, so people gather there all the time.
Okay, well, I'm going to add that to the New York list one day. I got to go to Central Park, of course, when we one day make it there, as you and I talked about. So,
Absolutely.
Tell me a little bit about your company. You've been doing, you obviously have this tutoring company. I'd love to hear just some of your background of how you even just got into doing what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of it was by accident. I have a graduate degree in English literature. And while I have a graduate degree in English literature, I took all of the courses as if I were going to attend medical school. So I took all the math and science classes. And about 10 years ago, I decided that just for a part-time gig, before I applied to medical school, I would do some tutoring. And what ended up happening is that turned into a 40-hour-a-week gig for me. And then little by little, I started working for 𝐿𝐳𝐭𝐬𝐢𝐚 Tutoring. And then I became a CEO and owner recently. So I think it was really, the luck part was meeting 𝐿𝐳𝐭𝐬𝐢𝐚 Tutoring. And then the part about my background that made me unique for this is when students were seeking out help with their coursework, especially high school students, I could be helpful with them both with any papers that they were doing with English and history, but also with a lot of their science and math coursework.
Okay, and you guys are very unique in your tutoring because you help kids with I think to get into getting what they need to get to the next level. Correct?
Yeah, so there's three parts to our business. One part is just academic preparation, academic tutoring. Students who may need help with Algebra 2 or biology or their English and history papers. The second part is test preparation. In New York City, there's the SHSAT to get into Stuyvesant, Bronx Science, Brooklyn Tech, and the other specialized high schools. There's the IC exam for other private independent high schools. And then, of course, there's the SAT and ACT for high school students who who want to attend college. And recently, we've been getting a lot more inquiries with some graduate tests, most notably right now the MCAT.
Okay, and have you seen? Because this is a world I don't know very well, so I have some really good questions here. What is the subject that comes up more than any other subject where kids are struggling in and they need the most help in?
Yeah, I would say that it's probably, I think that families always err on the side of caution with test preparation. They want to give their children every advantage possible with standardized tests. And they know that they've heard from other families that the work that we've done is really good. So I would say test preparation is on the non-traditional school side, something that we've helped a lot of students with. And on the school side, I would say that students recently have been struggling more or tend to struggle more maybe with science and math subjects.
Okay, those are the ones I struggled when I got into the higher maths. I know that was the one I was like, okay, algebra, give me algebra 1 again. That was my favorite. It was very simple. It made sense to me. And then my mom put me into consumer math as a homeschooler, and I loved consumer math because that one just made sense to me. But anything higher than that, oh my goodness, that's a whole different world. So do you feel like the students that are struggling with some of these subjects, is it self-inflicted and sometimes a lot where they're like struggling and they need they didn't study enough and their parents are like, hey, we're giving you a tutor, you need to get up on this? Or is it on the school side, a lot of times maybe like the teacher is teaching materials maybe they're not as comfortable with as they should be for these higher up solutions or the subjects? Where do you maybe kind of you see where the problem actually comes from?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mitchell. Something that I've been thinking a lot about over the years is the schooling system over in England. The tutoring system over there, for hundreds of years, I believe, they referred to it as the jewel and the crown. And I think that's something that they discovered. I think that Oxford and Cambridge were around since the 18th century, although I need to fact check myself on that. Is the tutoring system that they have where students can learn one-on-one or one-to-two with a teacher or with a tutor. And that, I think that, in England, they realize that when you're in this smaller environment, one-on-one, that the benefits of learning might be explosive. Whereas if you're in a classroom with 15 other students, 20 other students, it may be a little bit harder to stay engaged with the material. It might be harder to absorb the material that's being presented in class. So I think that, like you were saying before, with the math classes that you were taking as you progress through school, the more difficult the subject matter gets, the more important it is to stay active in the learning process. And I think that when I have a student in front of me, or one of my tutors has a student in front of me, there's no escape. It has to be an active process. You can't just passively sit in a classroom. I think student engagement can be partially an issue. Sometimes the material is really difficult, or more difficult. When things tend to be more difficult, it's easier when you have somebody right next to you who has an interest in you succeeding, that can help you really gain mastery of a certain set of material.
Do you see kids needing your services kind of ongoing just to continue to just get the best they can possibly be at that subject, or they need just a few sessions and they're like, hey, like I got the tools I need and now I'm good, and maybe I only need one session a month or one session a week? I know it's a big, kind of a long, big question, but kind of how do you see the students working with tutoring typically?
So I think the appropriate metaphor that's used often in this situation is when people speak about going to the gym and getting results. To get results, you need to do it consistently. You need to do it multiple times per week. Same thing with an instrument. I think studies show that it's more important to play an instrument consistently multiple times per week rather than just one time per week for 2 or 3 hours or whatever it may be. And I think the same is true for academic help or academic tutoring. It's important for students to just continue to have that targeted help with specific subjects. And then I think over the course of time, students learn and grow to become more independent with the subject matter. But I think when you look at it in terms of the longer picture, the help that we provide to students with writing papers or, learning math concepts or learning science concepts, all these things, if you have a really solid foundation, they really lay the groundwork for you to succeed in college. And so sometimes a student may understand a subject matter that's being tested in school in a particular month. But what ends up happening is we can challenge the student even a little bit more if they have mastery of it, in case they do want to study it in higher education, in college.
Okay. What happens when a student comes in and they need help with a subject and it's even above what you and all the other people who work for your company know, and you're like, oh my gosh, like, do I have to just wing this, or do I just give them some actionable strategies, or does that not happen because Eugene is a genius?
Eugene is not a genius, but what I like to do is, I think part of that question is about our hiring process. Typically, we tend to hire people who have graduate degrees in a given field. Sometimes we even have people who have multiple graduate degrees in different fields. And they, I think one thing that I remember when I was applying for education jobs was that during interviews, they would test for interpersonal skills, they would test for relatability, they would want to know what I was like as a candidate, which is very important, but there wouldn't be any academic component, which I always thought was so very interesting. And so one thing that we do is, as we're hiring candidates to tutor, say, math or English literature or history, we actually test them. That's one thing that we pride ourselves in. We put our candidates through the academic ringer to make sure that if we do send them into a student's home, that they have the proper, that they know that they have mastery of the material,
And obviously, I'm sure parents that are hiring you guys are very appreciative of that. I don't know if you guys mentioned that. I'm assuming you probably mentioned that in some way, of like the background of your staff and what they have. So I love that, and I think that's very important, of course. The other part's important too, which I'm guessing is like making sure these people are able to relate with kids and have a relationship. I mean, I don't know how much, if it's like straight to when the clock starts, you're like, all right, here we go. We're going to dive into calculus 2 right now. And then you're like, oh, okay. Like, or do they try and build up, or I guess, a relationship with the student first before the teaching begins?
Absolutely. That's the second and equally important ingredient that I look for when I'm hiring tutors. Not only do I look for tutors who have expertise in their subject area or subject areas, but I look for candidates who have strong, what I call desk side manner. That students, I ask myself, will this teenager have fun learning with this person? Will this teenager be able to relate to this person? What will student engagement be like? Because over the years, I've seen that, and I think when you read about the Oxford and Cambridge tutoring system, they talk about tutors having a personal interest in student success. And that's something that we want as well. We want tutors to be personally invested in student success. And part of that is the tutor and the tutee developing a rapport, being able to talk about things sometimes that are outside of the subject matter. Because when you have a student who then says, oh, this person is cool. Oh, this person is really smart. I want to be like this person. I want to have mastery of calculus 2, or I want to have, mastery of biology, or whatever it is. It helps expedite the learning process.
Man, I love it. Very cool. Wow. I could have probably used you guys back in high school for the things I was struggling in, because I know I got to the point where I got into calculus, and my mom was like, I can't, like, it's too much for me. Algebra 1 was like kind of probably her max for that, and then I was like, all right, and that's when I went into consumer math, because it was just what I could do. But you guys mainly work with high schoolers mainly. Is there ever middle schoolers that use you guys in your services?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that part of what we say we do is, there's, I think, a whole invisible curriculum that's not just about academic concepts, but it's about having the right habits. It's about, if there's reading assignments, annotating properly and taking notes properly. If it's about math, making sure that you structure the white paper in front of you correctly when you're solving math problems, right? Time management skills, getting into good habits. And I think a lot of parents, especially when they have older siblings, they realize, well, they want their younger children, they want their elementary school aged children to get into good habits, to have strong academic foundations, and they reach out to us for either general homework help or because their child is struggling in a particular subject.
Okay. And you guys do fully remote? All your staff is remote and doing just stuff digitally via like Zoom, or are you guys have in-person tutoring as well?
Traditionally, we've always been in person. What was interesting is that I believe the pandemic normalized virtual learning a little bit, virtual tutoring, virtual teaching. So out of the pandemic, interestingly enough, we've been getting more calls from families outside of New York City, from as far away as California and Florida, who heard about us because they know people in New York City and are interested mainly, I would say, in college application help and test preparation. That's something that we've had a lot of success with over the years. And it's something that families feel is worthwhile getting help with.
And so, perfect segue, because I was wanting to get into that. So you guys were in person. Obviously, in my head, I feel like tutoring would be way easier and way more effective in person, just because it's so hands-on. Have you guys seen any difference in the correlation between the two of like, hey, we did this online, maybe they need an extra session, or we need to focus on things longer because online it's just not the same? I know it's still effective, but it's probably not the same. Have you seen that though, or is that completely false?
I think with certain subjects, the subject that I think I would question the most is math. But with the era of the whiteboard, and I think what we touched upon earlier, when you have a class of 15 students online, if you're a teacher, that's probably really difficult to make sure that every single student is staying engaged. But if I have one student in front of me who I'm tutoring, say in calculus or in the SAT or whatever it may be, it's a lot harder for that student to escape. They have to remain active, and we function always as interlocutors. We always try to keep students engaged. So that's something we impress upon our tutors. We try to make sure that our tutors are keeping students engaged, maybe even more so than it would be in person, to try to compensate for the fact that it's virtual.
Okay, thank you. And for these schools that you guys are working, kind of side by side, like you obviously are helping their students out, have you guys seen any of the same things kind of pop up in students where you're like, man, if the school was doing this, it would probably help them in this area or help them not fall into this trap again? I don't. This is again your world, not mine. But have you noticed anything again with the school leaders listening in, going, "Ooh, I never thought about adding that to our curriculum or doing it, teaching this in a specific way"? And again, I know we only have like probably like 10, 15 minutes left, but what would you kind of say to that answer?
I would say two things come to mind. Sometimes you have students, you brought up yourself, you struggled with math when it reached a certain point, right? And I think the thing that gives students difficulty when they reach a certain point with math or science, for example, or maybe with literature, is that things become a little bit theoretical or things become abstract. And sometimes teachers focus on theoretical or abstract versions of things. What we try to do is we try to move it away from the abstract and we try to make it more technical, like a skill. In other words, if you see X situation, you respond by doing Y. I think the easiest example to give of that maybe is on the SAT. When there are abstract questions that they ask on the math section. One of the things that we teach our tutors and that I myself do when I'm working with students is I try to tell students, make it concrete. Take this out of the realm of the abstract, make it concrete for yourself. And then once students realize that, the answer is that much easier for them to see. I would say, right now, standardized tests, especially out of the pandemic, are in an area of uncertainty. I think a lot of parents, a lot of schools, a lot of admissions officers still say that they're looked at, the SAT and the ACT. I think that one thing that schools could do as well is know some of the content that's being tested if those tests continue. On grammar, if you're an English teacher on the grammar section, maybe for the SAT or the ACT, maybe when students get into the 10th or 11th grade, you do a review of comma splices, you do a review of appositives, you do a review of dangling modifiers. You teach students the importance of being concise in writing. Those are all skills that can translate very handily both on the SAT or ACT, but also in the real world when students are writing. And same thing goes for math. I think that students more and more, I think a lot of the math subject that's being tested on the SAT or ACT, or the SAT more so, I guess, is algebra based. And to make sure that students really have a good understanding of slope-intercept form, of vertex form, of functions, right? All those things are super important for students to know. And then finally, with reading comprehension, I think reading comprehension is a skill that's typically not taught directly in schools. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I think, I guess the reading comprehension version nowadays is a teacher assigns a text, and then a student will read a certain chapter from, let's say, The Great Gatsby or The Old Man and the Sea or whatever text it is, and they'll come into school the next day, and they'll be expected to have a discussion or to answer questions about the text. In some ways, there's a lot of value to discussions, but in some ways, if teachers don't tell students or don't teach students to go refer back to the text, they might be working from memory. And that might end up being a handicap on standardized tests. One of the things that we always impress upon our students is not to work from memory, to treat the reading comprehension passage sort of as a reference guide, right, and to continually refer back to it. And I think that's an important skill for students also to develop inside the classroom, continually referring back to the text, because sometimes our memories can't be trustworthy.
So would it be a good fit for school leaders that are listening if they have a student that maybe they're just excelling tremendously, but they need a higher end thing that the school maybe just isn't cut out to or fit to do at the moment, to say, hey, you need to go talk with Eugene and his team? Is that typically like a good referral? I want to make sure, like, have you as a resource for the school leaders listening.
Yeah, it is. A lot of the time, we're referred by other families. I think other families that have used this have been the best referral system for us. But I'm continually trying to look for ways to partner with schools, to work more closely with schools, because I think I have so much respect for classroom teachers. I was a classroom teacher myself, and I know how incredibly difficult it can be to keep the attention of 15 or 20 or 25 students, and then maybe to have, either tutoring resources or other tutors, just as another point of contact for students, in helping learn the material. There's a way in which it can enhance student success, and then help the teacher with, material that's coming down the line, because students will be that much more confident.
Okay. So if people wanted to get in touch with you, Eugene, what's some of the best ways they can do that? With a website or something to find out more information about your company?
Yeah, our website is probably the best way of doing that. You can Google 𝐭𝐿𝐺𝐿𝐴 Tutoring in New York City, or it's 𝐭𝐿𝐺𝐿𝐴NYC.com. And we have an inquiry form that families or schools can fill out. And I will see it, and I normally get back to people the same day.
Awesome. And last thing I'll ask you before we sign off, if you were to give one piece of advice for a school leader or a student, so maybe the school leaders can pass it on to their student, but whichever one you want to pick, one piece of advice that you would share from your knowledge of doing this for so long, what kind of advice would that be?
I'll end with a short, I think a short fable. In Aesop's fables, there's the story of the fox and the grapes. And the story of the fox and the grapes is a fox is walking along, and on a trellis he sees a branch of grapes, and he tries to get them, and he tries to reach them, and he tries to jump, but they are just out of reach for him. And instead of trying another way to figure out to get the grapes, he just says, well, those grapes must be unripe and they must be sour. And that, by the way, is where the expression sour grapes comes from in the English language. But I think that's such an appropriate metaphor for anybody in education to think about, because the moral of that story, I believe, it's easy to despise. It's easy to brush off as sour, that which you cannot attain. But what if that fox had a tutor, a teacher, an older person, a wiser person, a mentor, help him come at getting the grapes from a different angle, right? Teach them a new way of troubleshooting how to get those grapes. That's really the job of teachers and tutors. And I think that's something that teachers and tutors should bear in mind all the time. And then for students, academically, never think that something is too much out of your reach. Always try to find other ways of approaching material. There's a wealth of resources on YouTube, on the internet, in schools. Always try to find a way of coming at material, and don't give up on that Calculus 2 class if that's what you're doing right now.
Well, I can't think of a better way to end. That was perfect. I'm glad I asked that, because I love the Fox and the Grape story. I'd never heard it before. So thank you for sharing that. And obviously, thank you for taking time to be on the podcast. I'm wishing you and your company and your family everything, nothing but the best, as you guys continue to do some amazing work, which is just pouring in and educating this next generation to be better than they could be on their own. So thank you so much for all you're doing, and continue to do what you're doing. And hopefully, if I make my way up to New York City, we'll go grab something to eat and go hang out, because I'd love to spend some more time with you. So Eugene, thank you so much today, man.
Thanks so much for having me, Mitchell. It was great, speaking with you, and it's the work that you're doing for educators and for schools. It's wonderful because it's a way for all of us to hear more about what others are doing.
Thanks, bro. Well, another huge shout out and a thank you to Eugene for taking time and being on the podcast today. I loved our chat. I love what he's doing in the tutoring space, and I'm wishing him nothing but the best as he continues to grow and tutor this next generation that's coming behind us. And if you're a school that's listening to this and you need help growing your enrollment, automating the application process, man, I would love to hear from you. You can check us out online, schoolsuccessmakers.com. That's schoolsuccessmakers.com. Or check us out on Facebook. We have a private group just for school leaders called School Success Makers. We'd love to see you personally in there. School Success Makers on Facebook. Private group just for school leaders. We love working with schools. I love helping you guys find ways to solve the problems that you guys have so you can focus more on the students, which is, I know, what you want to do anyways. We will be here next week with another amazing guest as usual on the School Success Podcast. We'll see you then.